The story that you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts, featuring characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. The Circleville letters were hate mails sent to residents of Circleville, Ohio that contained gossip about their personal lives. In 1976, the quiet community of Circleville, Ohio began receiving threatening and occasionally sexually explicit letters in the mail. All were postmarked from nearby Columbus, lacked a return address, and were filled with gossip from the mysterious writer who claimed to be watching them carefully. One such case is what sparked widespread interest in the Circleville letters. The most intriguing and dangerous letter was sent to Mary Gillespie, a local bus driver. Mary Gillespie worked as a school bus driver and was one of the author's first targets. In addition to revealing disturbing facts, such as the author's surveillance of her home and the fact that she was a married mother, the letter also claimed that Gillespie was having an affair with a superintendent of schools. The author demanded, emphatically, that she stop and that she was not the victim of a hoax or prank. Mary hid the letters as they arrived, keeping a close eye on her daily activities in the hope of locating the writer. Mary's husband Ron soon received the letter as well, and as in all small towns, word of her affair spread like wildfire. The letter Ron received was less pleasant, warning him that he would be in danger if he did not stop the affair. Mary first told Ron that she had no idea what the author was talking about and that no affair was going on. Perhaps this was a botched blackmail attempt, but the damage to Mary's reputation had already been done. The mere fact that a mild-mannered woman who would easily blend in with the crowd was having an extramarital affair piqued the interest of gossip mongers. Ron and Mary Gillespie collaborated to try to ignore the threats and intimidation and continue on. That was quickly changed by another chilling letter. Mary and Ron gathered their loved ones and tried to come up with a list of suspects by this point, knowing that the writer was someone close to the Gillespie family. Ron's sister and his sister's husband, Paul Freshour, were among those present. Mary told the Freshours that she had a suspect in mind, David Longberry, a bus driver who once made a pass at her. Maybe Longberry was feeling betrayed and wanted to mock her, she reasoned. It was agreed that Paul would write a letter to Longberry to show that the Gillespies were aware of what he was doing and that he should stop immediately. The letters came to a halt for a brief moment, and then the signs appeared. On August 19, 1977, the horrors resumed, and this time they were personal. Ron's blood began to boil when he received a phone call. The caller stated that he was watching the Gillespie house and recognized Ron's truck. Ron, enraged, told his family that he thought he recognized the caller's voice and dashed out the door to confront him. He brought a gun with him. Nobody ever knew who the caller was, but it was quickly assumed that it was the Circleville letter writer. Ron's truck was discovered crashed around a tree a few hours after the phone call, with Ron inside and dead. Ron Gillespie was killed when his vehicle collided with a tree near where they lived. If the caller was the letter writer, he or she had clearly followed through on the threat to Ron's life. When the police arrived at the scene, they discovered that Ron's gun had been fired once, but there was no bullet casing on the scene. Detectives could find no reason or excuse for Ron to have fired at all, whether intentional or unintentional. The crash occurred moments after Ron drove away and no shots were fired. The alcohol level in Ron's body was 1.5 times the legal limit according to the post-mortem report, despite the fact that friends and family claimed Ron was never a heavy drinker. The Circleville letter writer was enraged by this information. Soon after, more letters began to arrive. This time, the other residents in and around Circleville, implying that Radcliffe was involved in some sort of cover-up regarding Ron's death and that Mary and Gordon Massey were responsible for his death. Mary eventually admitted to the affair, though she claimed it began after the first letters were sent to her. She was able to keep her job after this confession, but the letters continued, some of which were addressed to her daughter. After 6 years, the mysterious writer went one step further. He started putting up posters along her daily route for all to see. On the afternoon of February 7, 1983, Mary, fed up with the harassment, got off the bus and stormed towards one of the signs that made an obscene remark about her young daughter Tracy, ready to tear it down. According to the sign, the superintendent, Gordon Macy, was romantically involved with Tracy. She picked up the sign and the strange post that held it up, putting the entire setup back on the bus and going about her business. When she examined the sign more closely that evening, she opened a small container on the post. There was a .25 caliber handgun inside. If she had completely removed the sign, the gun would have fired, killing her. Scared, Mary immediately reported the incident, and when the authorities examined the weapon, they discovered it belonged to Mary's now former brother-in-law, Paul Freshour. Paul was doing everything he could to prove his innocence, even going so far as to tell the sheriff that his gun had been stolen. He was given a handwriting test to see if his handwriting matched that of the letters. The test he was given was not standard, as it required him to imitate one of the letters rather than simply writing the words in his own handwriting. Even if experts were able to prove that the handwriting was his, the investigation was criticized for administering the handwriting test incorrectly in the first place. The sheriff was convinced that Freshour was the Circleville letter writer, or that his handwriting was similar enough, and arrested him for attempted murder. There was one lead that the police were chastised for failing to pursue. Another bus driver said that on the day Mary discovered the booby trap, a yellow El Camino was parked at the intersection, and the man, who didn't resemble Freshour, was standing nearby pretending to urinate. The man's identity was never uncovered. In late October 1983, the trial began. A handwriting expert testified under oath during his trial that he believed Paul Freshour was the author of the Circleville letters. Paul was divorced from Mary's sister-in-law Karen at that time, and they both thought he was the author as well. He was never charged with writing the Circleville letters, but the court found him guilty and sentenced him to prison. Despite having an alibi for the day of the booby trap attempt on Mary's life, he was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the recommendation that he serve at least 7 years. Despite the evidence presented during the trial, many Circleville residents were already convinced that Freshour was guilty. The people of Circleville believed that the letter spree was over and that they could breathe freely again, but they had no idea that the horrors would continue. Soon after, more letters began to arrive, this time to other residents in and around Circleville, implying that Radcliffe was involved in some sort of cover-up regarding Ron's death and that Mary and Gordon Massey were to blame. The Circleville letters were assumed in earnest, and even elected officials were almost singled out. The threats and vulgarity of the prose were the same as before. Even though Paul was imprisoned, his letters continued to haunt the people of Circleville. What made matters worse was that Paul received a letter from the unknown killer. "Now, when are you going to believe you're not going to get out of there?" the letter stated. "I warned you 2 years ago. When we set them up, they stayed put. Do you not listen at all?" Despite the fact that many people saw this as proof that Paul was indeed innocent, the authorities were not convinced. They were still convinced that Paul was somehow behind everything that was going on and that it was all pre-planned. Some of the letters were written while Paul was in solitary confinement and had no access to the mail. The letters became more venomous, with one accusing the prosecutor in Paul's trial of murdering a pregnant woman. Freshour was regarded as a model prisoner while incarcerated. He rarely had the opportunity to communicate with the outside world. He was eventually released in May 1994, and the Circleville letters came to an end at that point. Freshour voluntarily checked himself into the Riverdale Hospital Mental Health Center after being released on a $50,000 bond because he wanted to be examined, possibly to help with a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. That plea was later withdrawn. Later on, a former co-worker named Wesley Wells testified that Freshour had purchased the gun from him for $35, and personal records revealed that Freshour had taken a day off from work on February 7, the same day Mary discovered the booby trap. Even more compelling was the fact that handwriting samples taken from Freshour's employment file matched 391 of the letters and 103 postcards sent to the Gillespie's and other local residents, according to handwriting experts. Over 1,000 letters had been sent across southern Ohio in total, with many of them complaining about political corruption. Some of them contained arsenic. Paul, who maintained his innocence, continued to seek justice for Ron's death and the identity of the Circleville writer. Until his death in 2012, Fresh Hour maintained his innocence. If he was guilty, the reasons for writing them remain a mystery. According to one theory, he felt he was demonstrating loyalty to his wife Karen, whose brother Ron may have known about Mary's affair, which Mary denied taking place until after Ron's death, and wanted to help both of them covertly put an end to it. There were numerous accusations and conspiracy theories, but the letters sent to Sheriff Dwight Radcliffe, who he claimed was running a career-long cover-up of corruption, were the most notable. This included concealing many of the letters received by people in order to cover up allegations of child molestations by a county coroner and the district attorney, the same one who prosecuted Paul of impregnating a school teacher and having her murdered. In the letters, it was said that Radcliffe was covering up crimes to decrease his town's crime statistics and further his career. There is still a lot of disagreement about who wrote the Circleville letters. There have been numerous theories over the years as to who it could be, but the authorities claim that it was Paul who did it. We don't know who it was because we don't have much evidence.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to say that I am incredibly grateful that you took time out of your schedule to listen to my narration. This is Nikki of Twysted Mind, wishing you a great rest of your day. Salamat.